The big metal shuttle moved slowly through the thick green trees of planet Kepler 442b. Inside the shuttle, Professor Zixthala checked her special computer with 3 of her 4 blue arms. She was not human. She had 4 arms and blue skin, and came from a planet far away. She taught survival classes at the big space university where students from many different planets came to learn. The professor had thought it would be good for students from different planets to learn together. She wanted them to help each other and become friends. But she did not expect the human student to want to join so much that Jake Sullivan sat in his seat and stretched his arms. He was 20 years old and came from Earth. He had brown hair and was not very tall, but he was strong. Jake was not worried about the test. Around him, other students were making scared sounds. The blue lizard students called Valkyrie were very smart when they read books, but they were not good at doing things with their hands. Next to them sat the glass-like students called Reddi. They looked like walking crystals, and their bodies changed color when they felt different things. Right now they were orange because they were scared. "Listen carefully, students," Professor Zixthala said into her microphone. "You have 3 days to build a place to live, find clean water, and show that you can stay alive. If you get too sick or hurt, your emergency beeper will call for help by itself." Jake looked out the window at the forest below. The trees were very big and very tall. He had grown up camping in the mountains with his grandfather, so forest did not scare him. His grandfather had taught him how to build things with wood and how to find food and water in the wild. Lisa Martinez sat on the other side of the shuttle. She was also human and studied plants. She had spent many days learning about the plants that grew on this planet. She looked calm and ready for the test. When the other students saw that she was not scared, they felt a little better. "The forest down there has no dangerous animals that will try to eat you," the professor continued. "But the weather changes fast and the ground is hard to walk on. You must follow the basic rules for staying alive." The shuttle went down toward the forest. Jake pressed his face against the window and looked at the trees. They were huge. Some of them were as tall as a 20-story building. Their thick branches and green leaves made the forest look like a big green carpet with lots of hiding places. "We will put each student in a different place," said the pilot. "You will be about 2 kilometers away from your closest classmate. Good luck to everyone." One by one, the students went down on small flying platforms. Jake watched as his classmates disappeared into the green forest below. Most of them quickly set up their emergency shelters. These were like small metal rooms that would keep them safe and warm for 3 days. The emergency shelters were easy to use, but they were not very comfortable. When it was Jake's turn, he stepped onto the platform. He only had his basic survival kit with him. The kit had a tool that could cut and drill and do many things. It also had tablets to clean dirty water, food that would last for 3 days, and a small box with medicine. He did not take an emergency shelter or any big machines. The other students looked at him like he was crazy. "Why did you not take a shelter?" asked one of the Valkyrie students. "How will you stay warm and dry?" Jake smiled. "I will build my own shelter. It will be better than those metal boxes." The Valkyrie student made a sound like a laugh, but it was not a happy laugh. "Humans are very strange," the student said as the platform went down through the tree branches. Jake looked around carefully. He had learned to always look at everything before making any decisions. The huge trees were very old and strong. Their big branches made paths through the air like bridges. The ground below did not have many small plants, which meant the soil was good and the water drained away properly. This was perfect for what Jake wanted to do. The platform touched the ground softly. Jake's boots made a small sound on the forest floor. The platform went back up to the shuttle right away, leaving Jake alone with the giant trees all around him. He took a deep breath of the clean air. The air had lots of oxygen in it, which made him feel good. The gravity on this planet was a little less than on Earth, so he felt a little lighter. Above him, the tree leaves made the sunlight soft and green. He could hear sounds in the distance. The Valkyrie students were making high, scared sounds. The Reddi students were making musical sounds that meant they were worried. Somewhere to the east, he thought he could hear Lisa making excited sounds about the plants she was finding. Jake put his backpack down and started to look around. His grandfather had taught him the first rule of survival: do not panic, do not hurry, and always look at everything before you do anything. He took out his multi-tool and started to make marks on a tree nearby. The two suns were in the eastern sky, which meant he had about 10 hours of light left. Water was the first thing he needed. He could hear the sound of running water somewhere. To the north, that was probably a stream or river. That would be his main water source, but he needed backup plans too. The big leaves of the trees around him would catch dew and rainwater. He could already see that it had rained recently because the soil was damp. A place to live was the second thing he needed. But Jake was not thinking about just staying alive. The teacher had said they needed to build a good shelter, but she did not say what that meant exactly. While his classmates were probably having trouble setting up their emergency shelters or trying to gather sticks for simple lean-tos, Jake was looking up at the trees. The tree right in front of him was perfect. The trunk was huge, at least 12 feet wide. It had strong branches that were spread out evenly, starting about 15 feet up from the ground. The way the branches were arranged made natural flat places at different levels. The thick leaves at the top would keep out rain and protect from any flying animals that might be dangerous. Jake started to count what he had in his pack. His multi-tool could cut wood, drill holes, and do many other things. The containers that held his emergency food could be used for other things. The rope from his pack could be made longer by using plant fibers. But he would need more materials. The forest floor was covered with fallen branches, leaves, and other things. Jake spent the next hour collecting materials and sorting them by size and strength. The wood that had fallen was dry and strong. The trees here seemed to have natural protection against water damage. By the time he had gathered enough materials to start building, the sounds of his struggling classmates had gotten louder. Through the trees he could see blue lights starting to turn on. These were the emergency beacons that called for help. Professor Zixthala would be getting worried about her students. Jake smiled and started to climb the big tree. He had work to do, and he was excited to get started. In just a few hours, he would show everyone what humans could do when they put their minds to it. While his classmates were still trying to figure out how to stay dry, he would be building something amazing. The forest was quiet except for the sounds of scared alien students in the distance. Jake looked up at the branches above him and started planning his treehouse. This was going to be fun. Jake's boots made a soft sound when they hit the forest floor. The emergency platform that had brought him down went back up to the shuttle right away, leaving him alone among the giant trees. He took a deep breath and smiled. The air was clean and fresh, much better than the air in the shuttle. The gravity was lighter than on Earth, which would make climbing much easier above him. The thick green leaves made the sunlight soft and gentle. He could hear his classmates in the distance. The Valkyrie students were making high, scared sounds. The Reddi students were making musical sounds that meant they were in trouble. Somewhere to his east, he was sure he could hear Lisa calling out. She sounded excited about the plants she was finding. Jake put his backpack down and started to think about his situation. His grandfather had taught him the most important rule of survival: never panic, never rush, and always look at everything before you do anything. He took out his multi-tool and started to make marks on a tree nearby. The two suns were in the eastern sky right now, which meant he had about 10 hours of daylight left. Water was the most important thing he needed. He could hear the sound of running water somewhere to the north. That was probably a stream or river. That would be his main water source, but he needed backup plans too. The big leaves of the trees around him would catch morning dew and rainwater. He could already see that it had rained not too long ago because the soil was still damp in some places. A place to live was the second most important thing, but Jake was thinking about more than just staying alive. The teacher had said they needed to build a good shelter, but she did not say exactly what that meant. While his classmates were probably having trouble setting up their emergency shelters or trying to gather sticks and leaves for simple lean-tos, Jake was looking up at the trees. The tree right in front of him was exactly what he needed. The trunk was huge, at least 12 feet across. It had strong branches that were spread out evenly, starting about 15 feet up from the ground. The way the branches grew made natural flat places at different levels, like floors in a building. The thick leaves at the top would keep out rain and protect him from any flying animals that might be dangerous. Jake started to count what he had with him. His multi-tool had a small saw, drill bits, and many other useful things. His emergency food came in containers that could be used for other things after he ate the food. The rope from his backpack could be made longer by using plant fibers that he could make from the trees and plants around him. But he would need to find more materials. The forest floor was covered with fallen branches, leaves, and other things that had dropped from the trees. Jake spent the next hour walking around and collecting materials. He sorted them by size and strength, putting the strongest pieces in one pile and the smaller pieces in another pile. The wood that had fallen was surprisingly dry and strong. The trees here seemed to have natural protection against water damage, which was very good for building. By the time he had gathered enough materials to start building, the sounds of his struggling classmates had gotten much louder. Through the trees he could see blue lights starting to turn on. These were the emergency beacons that would call for help if a student was in real danger. Professor Zixthala would be getting worried about her students. Jake smiled and started to look more carefully at his chosen tree. The first 15 feet would be the hardest part. He would have to climb up the huge trunk by making his own handholds and footholds. The bark was tough, but not too hard to work with. The lighter gravity would make the climb easier than it would have been on Earth. He walked around the tree and found the best place to start climbing. There was a small ridge in the bark that would give him a good grip with his hands. He took out his multi-tool and started to make small cuts in the bark. These would be places where he could put his hands and feet as he climbed up. The work was slow, but not too hard. Jake had climbed many trees when he was growing up. His grandfather had taught him how to read the bark and find the strongest places to grip. After about 30 minutes, he had made enough handholds to reach the first big branch. The branch was amazing. It was at least 6 feet wide and strong enough to hold several people. Jake stood on it and looked around. From up here, he could see much more of the forest. He could see where some of his classmates were trying to build their shelters on the ground. Most of them looked like they were having big problems. Jake started to plan his treehouse. He would need to build a platform first, then walls, then a roof. The platform would be the foundation for everything else. He had brought up some of the strongest fallen branches, and he started to arrange them on the wide tree branch. The multi-tool saw was small, but it worked well. Jake worked carefully, measuring each piece before he cut it. His grandfather had always said, "Measure twice, cut once," and Jake never forgot that lesson. Every piece of wood had to do more than one job. A piece that held up the floor could also help channel rainwater away. A piece that made a wall could also be used to store supplies. As he worked, Jake could hear his classmates still having trouble. The Velkari students had tried to dig holes in the ground to make burrows, but they had hit solid rock just below the surface. The Sherdi students were having trouble with the forest environment. Their crystal-like bodies did not work well. With wood and leaves and other organic materials around the middle of the day, Jake stopped working and looked at what he had done so far. The basic platform was finished. It was about 12 feet long and 8 feet wide. He had made it with a slight slope so that rainwater would run off instead of staying on the platform. He had started on the walls, weaving together smaller branches and big leaves to make barriers that would keep out wind and rain. The structure was already much better than anything his classmates were likely to build. But Jake was not finished. Not even close. He spent the afternoon working on the roof system. Instead of just making a simple slanted cover, he designed a complicated arrangement of overlapping panels. These panels would not only keep out rain but also collect it and direct it into containers where he could store it for drinking. The design was inspired by traditional Japanese buildings, with pieces that locked together and became stronger when weight was put on them. The walls came next. Jake had noticed that many of the plants in this forest had natural protection against water. He wove these plants into a tight pattern, making barriers that would keep out wind and rain but still let air move through. The weaving technique was something he had learned from a Native American craftsman during a summer job in Arizona. By late afternoon, Jake had finished the basic structure, but he was not happy with just having a good shelter. He started to work on the systems inside his treehouse. Using his multi-tools drill bits, he made a series of channels and small reservoirs for collecting and storing water. The containers that had held his emergency food became the basis for a food storage system. He hung them from the ceiling to keep them away from any animals that might try to get to his food. He made a simple, but effective, ventilation system using hollow branches and carefully placed air gaps. The design would pull cool air from below and push warm air out from above. This would keep the inside of his treehouse at a comfortable temperature even when the weather outside changed. As the sun started to set, Jake added the finishing touches. He made a rope and pulley system for pulling materials up and down from the ground. He built a small observation platform that stuck out from the main structure. He even made an emergency escape route using a controlled slide that would let him get down to the forest floor quickly if he needed to. The whole structure was hidden among the natural branches and leaves. It was waterproof, well ventilated, and completely sustainable. Jake had built himself a treehouse that would be comfortable for weeks, not just the 3 days that were required for the test. As darkness fell, Jake climbed up to his new home and looked out over the forest. In the distance, he could see the blue glow of emergency beacons. Many of his classmates had already given up and called for help. But Jake was just getting started. He had built something amazing. And tomorrow, everyone would see what humans could do when they put their minds to it. The first 15 feet up the tree trunk were the hardest part of Jake's climb. He had to move slowly up the huge trunk using his multi-tool to make small cuts for his hands and feet. The bark was tough but not too hard to work with. The lighter gravity on this planet made the climb easier than it would have been on Earth, but it was still hard work. Jake moved carefully, testing each handhold before putting his full weight on it. His grandfather had taught him to never trust just one grip when climbing. Always have 3 points of contact with the tree, 2 hands and 1 foot, or 2 feet and 1 hand. Never rush when you are high up, because one mistake could mean serious injury. When he finally reached the first big branch, Jake felt proud of himself. The branch was amazing, at least 6 feet wide and strong enough to hold several people. He stood on it and looked around at the forest. From up here, he could see much more. He could see where some of his classmates were trying to build their shelters on the ground. Most of them looked like they were having big problems. Jake started to work on his treehouse foundation. He began by making a basic framework, tying together the strongest fallen branches he had collected to make a foundation platform. The work was slow but satisfying. Each piece had to fit perfectly with the others. The multi-tool saw was small, but it worked well. Jake worked steadily, measuring each piece twice before cutting it once, just like his grandfather had taught him. Every piece had to do more than one job. Support beams that held up the floor could also channel rainwater away. Walls that kept out wind and rain could also store supplies. As he worked, Jake could hear his classmates still having trouble. The Velkari students had tried to dig holes in the ground to make burrows like they did on their home planet, but they had hit solid rock just below the surface. The sound of their claws scraping against stone echoed through the forest. The Reddi students were having even more trouble. Their crystal-like bodies did not work well with wood and leaves and other organic materials they were used to building. With crystals and metals, not living plants, around the middle of the day, Jake stopped working and looked at what he had done so far. The basic platform was finished. It was about 12 feet long and 8 feet wide, with a slight slope to make rainwater run off instead of staying on the platform. He had started on the walls, weaving together smaller branches and big leaves to make barriers that would keep out wind and rain. The structure was already much better than anything his classmates were likely to build, but Jake was not finished. Not even close. He spent the afternoon working on the roof system. Instead of just making a simple slanted cover like most people would do, he made a complicated arrangement of overlapping panels. These panels would not only keep out rain, but also collect it and direct it into containers, where he could store it for drinking later. The design was inspired by traditional Japanese buildings that his grandfather had shown him in books. The pieces locked together and became stronger when weight was put on them. The roof work was tricky. Jake had to climb even higher in the tree to attach the support beams. The branches got smaller as he went higher, but they were still strong enough to hold his weight. He worked carefully, always keeping one hand on a secure branch while he used the other hand to work with his tools. The walls came next. Jake had noticed that many of the plants in this forest had leaves that seemed to repel water naturally. He wove these plants into a tight pattern, making barriers that would keep out wind and rain but still let air move through. The weaving technique was something he had learned from a Native American craftsman during a summer job in Arizona. The man had taught him that the best shelters worked with nature. Instead of fighting against it, Jake worked steadily through the afternoon. The sounds of his struggling classmates got louder as the day went on. He could hear the Valkyrie students calling to each other in their high-pitched voices. They sounded scared and frustrated. The Reddi students were making musical sounds that meant they were in distress. Their crystal bodies were probably getting scratched and damaged by the rough bark and sharp leaves. By late afternoon, Jake had finished the basic structure, but he was not satisfied with just having a good shelter. The assignment had asked for a viable shelter, but it did not say what that meant exactly. Jake decided to make his shelter much more than just viable. He started to work on the systems inside his treehouse, using his multi-tools drill bits. He made a series of small channels and reservoirs for collecting and storing water. The design was simple but clever. Rainwater would flow down the channels and collect in the reservoirs, where it would be filtered through layers of sand and charcoal that he had prepared. The containers that had held his emergency food became the basis for a food storage system. He hung them from the ceiling to keep them away from any animals that might try to get to his food. He made a simple but effective ventilation system using hollow branches and carefully placed air gaps. The design would pull cool air from below and push warm air out from above. This would keep the inside of his treehouse at a comfortable temperature even when the weather outside changed. The system was based on something he had learned in a science class about how prairie dog burrows stayed cool in summer and warm in winter. As the two suns started to set, Jake added the finishing touches to his treehouse. He made a rope and pulley system for pulling materials up and down from the ground. This would make it easy to get supplies without having to climb down and back up again. He built a small observation platform that stuck out from the main structure, giving him a good view of the surrounding forest. He even made an emergency escape route using a controlled slide. That would let him get down to the forest floor quickly if he needed to. The rope and pulley system was especially clever. Jake had learned the basic principles from helping his grandfather build a treehouse when he was 10 years old. The pulleys made it possible to lift heavy objects with much less effort. The rope was strong enough to hold several times his body weight. The whole structure was almost invisible from the ground. It was hidden among the natural branches and leaves. Someone could walk right under the tree and never know there was a house above them. It was waterproof, well-ventilated, and completely sustainable. Jake had built himself a treehouse that would be comfortable for weeks, not just the 3 days that were required for the test. As darkness fell, Jake climbed up to his new home and tested all his systems. The water collection system worked perfectly. The evening brought a light rain, and Jake watched as the water flowed down his channels and filled his storage containers. The ventilation system kept the inside of the treehouse comfortable, and the woven walls blocked wind while allowing just enough airflow to prevent condensation. Jake made himself a simple dinner from his emergency rations and settled down for the night. Through the woven walls, he could see the blue glow of emergency beacons lighting up the forest like fireflies. It sounded like many of his classmates had already given up and called for help. Their emergency shelters had probably failed in the wind and rain, but Jake was warm and dry and comfortable. He had built something amazing in just one day. Tomorrow, when the professors came to check on the students, They would see what humans could do when they put their minds to it. Jake smiled as he drifted off to sleep, listening to the gentle sound of rain on his roof and the distant calls of his struggling classmates. He had passed the test before it even really started. Jake woke up in his treehouse feeling completely rested. The sun was just starting to come up, and light was filtering through the green leaves above him. His water collection system had worked perfectly during the night. The light rain had filled his storage containers with clean, fresh water. The ventilation system had kept the inside of his treehouse at just the right temperature, and the woven walls had blocked the wind while still letting enough air flow through to prevent dampness. As Jake stretched and got ready for his second day, he heard a lot of noise coming from the forest below. Through his woven walls, he could see blue lights glowing like stars scattered across the forest floor. These were the emergency beacons that meant students were in trouble and needed help. Jake quietly made his way to his observation platform and looked out over the forest. In the distance, he could see the standard emergency shelters glowing like blue mushrooms. Many of them had fallen over during the night's wind. Others were clearly flooded from the rain. Some had just collapsed completely, leaving students huddled under whatever protection they could find. The Valkyrie students were making distressed sounds that echoed through the forest. Their emergency shelters were designed for open plains, not dense forests. The shelters kept getting caught on branches and torn by the wind. The Shardia students were having even worse problems. Their crystal bodies did not handle moisture well, and the humid forest air was making them sick. To Jake's surprise, he spotted Lisa Martinez about half a kilometer to the east. She had found a natural cave formation and was making the best of it. Her situation looked far from comfortable, but she was clearly determined to finish the test. Jake admired her determination. She was one of the few students who had not given up yet. Around the middle of the morning, Jake heard the sound of a rescue shuttle approaching from the sky. The shuttle made a loud humming noise as it flew over the forest. Professor Zixthala's voice echoed through the forest using a loudspeaker. System. All students, please turn on your location beacons, the professor's voice said. We are checking to make sure everyone is safe. This is not an emergency evacuation. Repeat, this is not an emergency evacuation. Jake activated his location beacon and waited. He could hear the shuttle moving around the forest, probably checking on students who had activated their emergency signals. Within an hour, he could hear voices approaching his tree. Professor Zixthala's distinctive shape was visible through the undergrowth. She was with 2 teaching assistants and what looked like a floating camera that could record everything. The professor had 4 arms and blue skin. She moved through the forest carefully, looking around for signs of students. One of her teaching assistants was a young Shardi whose crystal body was flickering different colors as he checked his instruments. The other assistant was a Valkyrie, who kept looking up at the trees nervously. Student Sullivan, Professor Zixthala called out in her loud voice, please respond to location check. Up here, Professor, Jake called down cheerfully from his treehouse. There was a long pause. Jake could see the professor and her assistants looking around the forest floor, clearly confused. They were turning in circles, trying to figure out where his voice was coming from. I am sorry, Student Sullivan, but we cannot see you, the professor said. Please turn on your emergency beacon and stay where you are. I am about 30 feet up, Professor, Jake replied, in the tree. Another pause. Jake heard the sound of anti-gravity units starting up as the professor and her assistants began to rise into the air. When they reached the level of the tree branches, the expressions on their faces were worth all the work Jake had put into building his treehouse. Professor Zixthala stared at the treehouse with all 4 of her eyes wide open. Her mouth was hanging open in amazement. The structure was clearly visible now that they were at the right height, but it blended so well with the natural environment that it was almost impossible to see from below. It looked like it had grown there naturally. Student Sullivan, she said slowly, what exactly have you built here? A good shelter, Professor, Jake replied with a smile. Just like the assignment asked for. One of the teaching assistants, the Young Reddi, whose crystal body was now flickering with amazement, moved closer to look at the construction. His crystal form was shifting through different colors as he tried to understand what he was seeing. "Professor," the assistant said in a voice full of wonder, "this is incredible. Look at the joint work here. And the water collection system. And the ventilation design. This is not just a shelter. This is a complete living system." Jake gave them a tour of his treehouse, explaining the different systems and design elements. He showed them how the roof collected rainwater and directed it into storage containers. He demonstrated the ventilation system and how it kept the air fresh and comfortable. He explained how the walls kept out wind and rain while still allowing air to flow through. The professor took detailed recordings with her scanner. Her expression grew more amazed with each feature Jake showed her. The floating camera recorded everything, buzzing around the structure like a curious insect. "Student Sullivan," Professor Zixthala said finally, "how long did this take you to build?" "About 6 hours yesterday," Jake replied, "plus a couple more hours this morning to make some improvements." 6 hours, the professor repeated. Her voice was flat with disbelief. "You built this entire structure in 6 hours?" "Well, yes," Jake sighed. "I had plenty of daylight and the materials were easy to find." The tree provided most of the structural support, so it was really just a matter of creating the platform and adding weather protection. The camera drone was buzzing around the structure, recording every detail. Jake could see Professor Zixthala's mind working. She was probably already thinking about how this would change her entire class curriculum. The Valkyrie teaching assistant was examining the rope and pulley system. "Professor," he said, "this lifting mechanism is more efficient than anything in our emergency equipment. How did a student know to build something like this?" "My grandfather taught me," Jake explained. "He said that if you are going to be somewhere for more than a few hours, you might as well be comfortable." The Reddi assistant was studying the water collection system. His crystal body was glowing with excitement. "The efficiency rating on this system is remarkable," he said. "It could collect enough water to support multiple individuals for weeks." Professor Zixthala was making notes on her scanner as fast as she could. "Student Sullivan," she said, "what other capabilities does this structure have?" Jake showed them the food storage system, the emergency escape route, and the observation platform. He explained how each system worked together to create a complete living environment. The professors were amazed by every detail. "On most worlds," Professor Zixthala said finally, "this level of environmental adaptation would take months of study and preparation. Yet you achieved it in hours, using only basic tools and local materials." "Humans are pretty good at adapting," Jake replied. "We have had to be. Earth is not exactly a gentle planet." The professors spent another hour examining every aspect of the treehouse. They tested the structural strength, analyzed the water collection efficiency, and marveled at how well it blended with the natural environment. The floating camera recorded everything for later study. When they finally prepared to leave, Professor Zixthala looked back at Jake one more time. "Student Sullivan," she said, "I think this changes everything we thought we knew about human capabilities." Jake just smiled and waved as they flew away. He could hear them talking excitedly as they disappeared through the trees. Tomorrow would bring even more surprises when the final evaluation began. The rescue shuttle arrived that afternoon to collect the students who had called for help. Jake watched from his observation platform as the big metal ship landed in a clearing about a kilometer away. He could see students walking toward the shuttle, many of them looking embarrassed and upset. More than half of his classmates had given up on the survival test. The Valkyrie students were the worst off. Their blue scales were scratched and dirty, and they moved slowly like they were very tired. Their emergency shelters had been completely destroyed by the wind and rain. Some of them had tried to dig burrows in the ground, but the hard rock under the soil had made that impossible. The Reddi students looked even worse. Their crystal bodies were cracked and cloudy from the moisture in the forest air. They were not built for this kind of environment. Their home planet was dry and rocky, with very little plant life. The humid forest had made them sick and weak. Jake felt sorry for his classmates, but he also felt proud of what he had accomplished. While they had struggled with basic survival, he had built something amazing. His treehouse was not just a shelter, it was a complete home that could support him for weeks or even months. Lisa Martinez was one of the few students who chose to stay and finish the full 3 days. Jake could see her in the distance, still working around her cave shelter. She had managed to create a reasonably functional place to live, and she had successfully found and cataloged several new plant species. She was determined to complete the assignment no matter what. The few Valkyrie students who had not given up were still huddled in whatever emergency shelters were still working. They were technically meeting the assignment requirements, but they looked miserable. Their shelters were small metal boxes that kept them alive but were not comfortable at all. On the second day, Professor Zixtala returned with a full academic review board. Jake could see them approaching through the forest. A group of professors and administrators from different species and different planets. They all wanted to see the treehouse that had amazed Professor Zixtala so much. When they reached his tree and rose up to the level of his treehouse, Jake found himself giving lectures about human survival techniques, building methods, and how to use natural resources. The treehouse had become an unofficial case study in practical engineering and environmental adaptation. The review board included professors from many different species. There was a tall, thin ethereal whose body looked like it was made of light and energy. There was a heavy, rock-like granite whose species was known for their building skills. There was even a floating gas being whose body was mostly air and electricity. The most remarkable aspect, Professor Zixtala explained to the review board, is not just the technical achievement, but the way Student Sullivan approached the problem. While other students focused on meeting minimum requirements, he created a sustainable, comfortable habitat that could support long-term occupation. Jake shrugged modestly. It is just basic camping skills, Professor. My grandfather taught me that if you are going to be somewhere for more than a few hours, you might as well be comfortable. The review board spent hours examining every aspect of the treehouse. They tested how strong the structure was by putting weight on different parts. They analyzed how well the water collection system worked by measuring how much water it could gather. They marveled at how well the treehouse blended with the natural environment. The granite professor was especially interested in the construction techniques. His species were master builders, but they usually worked with stone and metal. On most worlds, he said in his deep, rumbling voice, this level of environmental adaptation would take months of study and preparation. Yet you achieved it in hours, using only basic tools and materials you found in the forest. Humans are pretty good at adapting, Jake replied. We have had to be. Earth is not exactly a gentle planet. We learn to survive in all kinds of environments. Hot deserts, frozen mountains, dense jungles, open plains. We had to learn to use whatever materials we could find. The ethereal professor was fascinated by the design principles. Her species were known for their advanced technology, but they rarely worked with organic materials. Your shelter uses living systems, she observed. The tree provides structure, the leaves provide insulation, the natural water flow provides utilities. You worked with the environment instead of fighting against it? That is how my grandfather taught me, Jake explained. He said that nature has already solved most of the problems we face. We just need to learn how to work with nature instead of trying to control it. The gas-being professor was interested in the ventilation system. His species lived in the atmosphere of gas giant planets, so airflow was very important to them. This circulation pattern is more efficient than many artificial systems, he said, his voice sounding like wind through trees. How did you know to design it this way? I learned about it in school, Jake said. Prairie dogs on Earth dig tunnels that stay cool in summer and warm in winter. They use the same principles. Cool air comes in from below, warm air goes out from above. It is a very old technique. When the final shuttle arrived on the third day to collect the remaining students, Jake almost did not want to leave. The tree house had become a comfortable home, and he had genuinely enjoyed the challenge of creating something functional and beautiful from raw materials found in the forest. Professor Zixthala approached him as he packed his gear. "Student Sullivan," she said, "I hope you will consider changing your academic focus. The engineering college would be very interested in your practical approach to environmental challenges." "Thanks, Professor," Jake replied, "but I am pretty happy studying biology. Besides, I think the real lesson here is not about engineering." "Oh?" Professor Zixthala asked, curious. "What would that be?" Jake gestured toward his treehouse, which was already beginning to blend back into the forest canopy. "In a few weeks, it would be almost impossible to see from the ground. Every species approaches problems differently," he said. "Your students focused on meeting requirements, using technology, or trying to recreate familiar environments. I just tried to work with what was already here. And your point is?" "Maybe the best survival strategy is not about conquering the environment," Jake said thoughtfully. "Maybe it is about becoming part of it." Professor Zixthala was quiet for a long moment, thinking about what Jake had said. "That is a very human perspective, Student Sullivan." "Yeah," Jake smiled, putting his backpack on his shoulders. "We are pretty good at making ourselves at home anywhere." As the shuttle lifted off and headed back to the university, Jake looked back at his treehouse one last time. It would probably stand for years, a testament to human adaptability and the universal principles of good design. He wondered if other students would find it on future survival tests, and what they would think of the human who built a home in the trees. The story would spread throughout the Galactic University, becoming the stuff of legend. The human who built a treehouse in 6 hours while alien students panicked in the forest below. It would be told and retold, growing more elaborate with each telling, but Jake did not care about becoming a legend. He had learned something more valuable during those 3 days in the forest. Sometimes the best way to survive is not to fight against the world around you, but to find your place within it. And sometimes that place is 30 feet up in a tree, watching the universe unfold below.